Our lesson today is going to be taking a percent and turning it into a decimal, and then getting a decimal and turning it into an equivalent percent. So let's take a look. If you can remember this, it makes it a lot easier, but I'm going to show you the math behind it as well. If you have a decimal, if you're given a decimal and they ask you to turn it into a percent, you'll be multiplying by 100, which is 10 to the second power. So if you multiply a number by 100, it's going to be getting two place values bigger, which means you will move the decimal point to the right. If you have a percent and you need to convert it to a decimal, it's going to be just the opposite. You're going to divide by 10 to the second power, or divide by 100, and that means your number is going to get smaller by two place values, and so you will move your decimal point 2 to the left. So let's take a look at the problem. It has right 19% as a decimal. Here we have 19%. I would hope that you would know that if you have 19%, that means 19 per 100. And you could just write it as 19 over 100. And right away, you just have your percent. Anything over 100 is giving you a percent. But if you had to, you could go and look at the math. 19 over 100 is the same as 19 over 10 to the second power, which means 19 divided by 10 to the second power. Your number 19 is going to be getting smaller by two place values, and therefore you have 0.19, and 0.19, you would read it like you see it. It would be 19, and then if you would look at what place value it is, tenths, hundredths, there you'd have your hundredths, which is the same thing if you know how to read 19% as 19 over 100, you would have gotten the same answer. And if you take a look, if you are given a percent, you are going to divide by 10 to the second power. That's what we did. Take a look at this. They're giving you a decimal, right? 0.21 as a percent. You could write 0.21, and if you knew how to write it as a fraction, you would again say, I'm looking and I've got 21 tenths place, hundredths place, 21 over 100, which would give you your percent. Anything that is over 100 gives you your percent. You'd have 21%. Again, decimal to percent, multiply by 10 to the second power. That means that your decimal would move over 1, 2 to the right, and that's how you get your 21%. So let's take a look at another problem. Same thing holds true. The only difference is they're giving you decimals, and that really shouldn't concern you. If you look at writing 2.5 as a percent, you're going from decimal to percent. Decimal to percent, that means you are going to be multiplying by 10 to the second power, and your decimal will go to the right. And if you take a look, we could do the math this way. You'd end up with your 2.5 times 10 to the second power. Here, you'd be moving it to the right, two place values, and we'd be going 1, 2, and since there is nothing there, we could go ahead and put a 0. And if we do that, we would end up with 250, and it would be actually 250%. 250%. One thing that I want to show you right now, just a little sidebar. Anytime you have a whole number like the 2 here, you are going to have something that's over 100%. The number 1, if you can remember that the number 1 as a percent is 100%, then you'd know the number 2 is 200%. The number 3 is 300%. So when you have 2.5 and they want it as a percent, you would know that it's going to be 200 and something percent. And in this case, it's 2.5, so 250%. Now they're asking us in Part B, write 39.76% as a decimal. So they're giving you the percent. You've got to take it to a decimal. That means you're dividing by 10 to the second power, which means that you are going to be moving your decimal place 2 to the left. So I'm going to just move this out of the way. You could definitely do the math. Say 39.76 divided by 100, because that is percent per 100. 39.76 divided by 10 to the second power. You have your 39.76. You're dividing by 100. 10 to the second power. Is your number getting bigger or smaller if you divide by 100? It's getting smaller. How many place values smaller? 2. And your answer would be 0.3976. Now, okay, let's take a look at this last problem, converting a mixed number percentage to a decimal. It kind of looks like a mess, but the one thing that you should know, and I'm going to just highlight this for you, what's in the upper right corner, this is something you should know like the back of your hand. And you should know it because it really has to do with money. If you have 1/4 of a dollar, isn't it just 25 cents? So 1/4 is 0.25. 2/4 is the same as 1/2. And what's a half a dollar? 0.5 or 0.50, 50 cents. 3/4 or 3/4 of a dollar is 75 cents. It's like you have 3/4, so 75%. And if you can remember that, it's going to make life a lot easier when you have a problem like we have today, where they have 6 3/4% and they want it as a decimal, not as a percentage. So here it is. You've got your 6 3/4%. I would hope that you could convert that to 6.75% because it's 3/4 of a dollar. And then you could say that it's 6.75 per 100, which is 6.75, divided by 100. And again, we usually say divide by 10 to the second power. That means, is it getting bigger or smaller? It's getting smaller. How many place values smaller? That's what your exponent has there. 2. So that means if I'm moving a 2 to the left, I'd have to put a 0 in here. We'd annex a 0. Doesn't change the value at all. And I would have to move my decimal 2 places to the left. And my answer then would be 0.0675. Now, you could have done that really easily if you knew that 6 3/4% was actually 6.75, if you knew that right from the get-go. Because if you did, and if you knew when it was a percent to decimal, it would be moving 2 to the left, and then you would have gone 1, 2, and you would have had the same thing, 0.0675. That's it.